She only wanted to take her seat, the one she'd paid for, the one her name was printed on. But in a single moment, that simple act became a public trial. 11-year-old Amara Jenkins, a young black tech billionaire, stood frozen in the aisle as a white passenger refused to move. The flight crew hesitated. The passengers watched. And in their silence, something inside her broke. What happened next didn't just ground a plane. It exposed how power, privilege, and prejudice collide at 30,000 feet. She thought this was just another business trip. But it was about to become a lesson the world would never forget. For Amara Jenkins, mornings began long before the world woke up. At just 11, she wasn't scrolling social media or planning her next sleepover. She was checking the numbers on her tech company, Dreamscape, a learning platform now used in classrooms across the globe. Her bedroom in Detroit looked like any kid's room at first glance. Stuffed animals postered in pastel walls, but in the corner sat 3 glowing monitors, quietly running code she'd written herself. Her father, Marcus, called her Sparrow, his reminder that she could soar anywhere, no matter how heavy the world tried to make her wings. Today was supposed to be a milestone, their flight to San Francisco for a meeting that could bring Dreamscape to schools in struggling communities. Marcus handled the logistics. Amara rehearsed her pitch, every word memorized, every statistic perfect. To her, this wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about proving that brilliance had no color and that her seat at the table had been earned, not gifted. But as she packed her blazer and presentation notes, that quiet unease settled in again, a feeling she'd learned not to ignore. Because for all her success, Amara knew the world didn't always see her achievements, only her skin. She thought this trip would open doors. But at 30,000 feet, it would expose how far society still has to go. The airport buzzed with its usual rhythm, rolling suitcases, boarding calls, the hum of early travelers chasing deadlines and dreams. Amara walked beside her father, head high, presentation tablet tucked under her arm. To most, she looked like any bright kid tagging along on a business trip. But those who took a second glance, the tailored blazer, the quiet confidence, knew there was something different about her. Marcus booked her a first-class seat, 3 rows ahead of his own. It was their tradition. Amara used the quiet time to prepare, while he gave her the space to lead, to practice being the woman she was already becoming. When the gate agent smiled and said, "Enjoy your flight, Miss Jenkins," Amara beamed. This was her moment, until she reached seat 2A. A man sat there, mid-50s, silver hair, business suit, the kind of person who carried entitlement like an accessory. Amara double-checked her ticket, thinking maybe she'd made a mistake. But the number was clear. Seat 2A, her seat. "Excuse me," she began softly, but he didn't even look up. Instead, he sighed, adjusted his briefcase, and waved her off like an inconvenience. When a flight attendant arrived, Amara felt a flicker of hope. Surely this could be sorted quickly. But the attendant barely glanced at the tickets before turning to Amara. "Sweetheart, there must be some mix-up. Why don't you take that seat in the back while we figure it out?" Marcus watched from economy, his jaw tightening as he saw his daughter shrink under the weight of adult dismissal. He stood immediately, but Amara caught his eye and shook her head. She wanted to handle it. The man finally spoke, his voice low but sharp. "Let's be reasonable. She doesn't need first class. I've got real work to do up here." The words hit harder than turbulence. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. The silence of witnesses. Familiar, heavy, complicit. Amara could feel the tears burning, but she stood her ground. "This is my seat," she said quietly, her fingers tightening around her boarding pass. It wasn't just about a chair. It was about being seen, being believed. Another attendant approached, this one with a kinder expression, and checked the tickets again. "Sir," she said finally, "her seat is valid." The man muttered something under his breath. Too low to catch, but loud enough to sting. Reluctantly, he gathered his things, glaring as if she had stolen something precious. As Amara slid into 2A, the seat suddenly felt heavier than it had any right to be. Across the aisle, she could feel the eyes of other passengers, some curious, some disapproving, all watching. The man's resentment radiated beside her like static. But it wasn't over. Moments later, she noticed him on his phone. typing furiously, his jaw set with quiet fury. Amara didn't know what he was sending, or to whom. She only knew that unease had returned, stronger this time. Minutes later, as the plane taxied toward the runway, the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm, professional, but with an edge that made everyone pause. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We've received a notice from ground security. This aircraft will be returning to the gate." Whispers rippled through the cabin. Eyes turned toward Amara. Her hands trembled against her lap as realization sank in. Someone had made a call about her, and in that moment, the girl who built a billion-dollar empire from her bedroom found herself treated like a threat simply for existing in the wrong seat. She thought the humiliation was over when he moved. But what came next would shatter that illusion completely. The engines hummed low as the plane rolled back toward the gate, confusion rippling through the cabin like electricity. Amara sat still, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap, every muscle locked. She could feel it. The shift in the air, the eyes turning toward her, the unspoken suspicion filling the space between whispers. Somewhere behind her, a voice muttered, "What's going on?" And another whispered, "It's that girl." I saw the attendant talking to her. Marcus pushed his call button, his calm composure cracking for the first time. "She's 11, he said to no one in particular, his voice low and fierce. "My daughter is 11. But no one was listening. When the plane stopped, the silence was suffocating. The captain's voice broke through it, steady but cold. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Security will be boarding shortly." The door opened with a mechanical hiss, and two uniformed officers stepped inside. Their vests bore the airport security insignia, but the weight they carried wasn't just authority. It was assumption. They walked past first class, scanning boarding passes on their tablets, until one of them stopped directly in front of Amara. "Miss Jenkins?" Her throat tightened. She nodded. "We need to verify some information," the officer said. "Please come with us." Marcus was already moving, stepping into the aisle before they could touch her. "She's a child," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "You're not taking her anywhere without me." "Sir, we received a report of a passenger traveling under false identification," the officer replied mechanically. "We just need to confirm her documents." False identification. The words hung in the air, absurd and poisonous. A woman across the aisle gasped. Someone else murmured, "Is this a scam?" The whispers multiplied, feeding off one another. Amara fumbled for her passport, her fingers shaking. She handed it over. The cover bent slightly from years of use. The officer scanned it, then looked back at her, expression unreadable. "This is valid," he said after a moment. "But the report claims she's being used as a front for her." Marcus slammed his hand against the armrest. "That's enough. You think an 11-year-old is committing corporate fraud? What kind of logic is that?" The officer didn't answer. He just turned to his partner, and they exchanged a look, the kind that said this wasn't about logic at all. The entire cabin was watching now, phones angled discreetly. Whispers turned into quiet judgments. The same passengers who had looked away during the seat dispute were now spectators to a deeper humiliation. And through it all, the man from before, Richard Blackwell, sat rigid, avoiding Amara's eyes. His phone was still open on his tray table, the call log on display. She saw it, even from across the aisle. Her stomach turned. The officer looked back at her. "Miss Jenkins, do you understand why we have to ask these questions?" She wanted to say yes, to keep her voice calm like her father had taught her, but the truth pressed harder in her chest. "No, I don't understand why people see me as a problem before they see me as a person." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Because I'm black." The words hit the air like glass breaking. The officer hesitated, as if realizing what they'd become part of. Marcus reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. "That's enough," he said again, quieter this time, almost pleading. "You've done enough." The captain appeared at the front of the cabin, speaking quietly with the officers. After a moment, he turned to the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we confirmed there was a false report. The situation is resolved." But it wasn't resolved. Not for Amara. Because the damage had already been done. The murmurs, the stares, the shame that clung to her skin like smoke. She felt small in a way that billions of dollars couldn't protect her from. The officers apologized mechanically before retreating. But their words meant nothing. As the plane prepared to resume its route, Amara looked out the window, her reflection staring back, tear-streaked but defiant. In that reflection, she saw more than herself. She saw every child who had ever been questioned for daring to exist where others thought they didn't belong. And somewhere behind her, Richard Blackwell finally spoke, just 3 words, heavy with guilt. "I made the call." Marcus turned sharply, disbelief flashing to fury. The entire cabin went silent. Richard's voice shook. I thought she was lying." Amara met his gaze, her voice steady now. "You thought wrong." The engines roared back to life, but the atmosphere never recovered. The passengers had witnessed something raw and undeniable. How quickly a young black girl's genius could be reduced to suspicion. The plane lifted into the air once more, but for Amara Jenkins, the ascent felt heavier than ever. She thought the world would see her for what she'd built. But today, it saw only what it chose to see, and that truth was about to reach far beyond this plane. When the plane landed in San Francisco hours later, Amara didn't rush to disembark. She waited until the aisle cleared, until the murmurs faded into the distance. The cabin smelled of recycled air and unease. Passengers avoided her eyes, the same ones who had watched her humiliation unfold in silence. Only one woman, a young flight attendant who'd said nothing when it mattered, stopped beside her and whispered, "I'm so sorry." Amara didn't respond, because sorry didn't erase the sting. Sorry didn't change the fact that an 11-year-old girl had been treated like a suspect for daring to sit where she belonged. Marcus walked beside her through the terminal, protective but quiet. He knew this was one of those moments that would shape her forever, not because of what was said, but because of what it revealed. For all her success, all her brilliance, the world still saw her through a lens she hadn't chosen. By the time they reached baggage claim, her name was already trending online. Passengers had uploaded clips. Headlines multiplied within hours. Asterisk, young black billionaire, detained on plane after false accusation. Asterisk, some called it injustice. Others called it a misunderstanding. But Amara knew the truth. Misunderstandings don't happen by accident. They happen because bias is baked into the way people see, think, and react. The airline issued a statement. So did airport security. Apologies wrapped in corporate language, regret protocol, unfortunate incident. Richard Blackwell, the man who made the call, released his own message, too. He said he misread the situation. He said he never intended harm. But intent doesn't erase impact. Amara didn't speak publicly for 3 days. She needed time to find the right words, not as a billionaire or as a headline, but as a human being. When she finally did, her message wasn't angry. It was steady, heartbreaking, and real. She posted a video titled Asterisk, "The Seat I Paid For." Asterisk in it. She didn't name names or attack anyone. She just told the truth. She described how silence felt heavier than insults, how suspicion could strip even the most confident person of dignity, and how no amount of success could buy freedom from prejudice. Millions watched. The comments flooded in, some in outrage, some in solidarity, some in disbelief that this could happen to a child. And yet, for every voice of support, there were others defending the system that allowed it. She's overreacting. Maybe it was just a mix-up. Not everything is about race. But it was. It always had been. In the weeks that followed, the airline revised its bias training program. Security protocols were updated to require multiple verifications before passenger removal. On paper, it looked like progress. But Amara didn't see it that way. "They fixed a rule," she said later, "but not the reason it was broken." The experience changed her, not by breaking her spirit, but by sharpening her purpose. Dreamscape, the company she'd built to help children learn, began a new initiative, scholarships and mentorship programs for underrepresented youth in tech and entrepreneurship. "If they're going to question our right to sit at the table," she said, "then we'll build our own." Marcus watched her speak at the program's launch, pride in his eyes. But even as the crowd applauded, a quiet truth lingered between them. No parent should have to watch their child prove their humanity just to exist in peace. And that's what made Amara's story matter. It wasn't just one flight. It wasn't just one man's bias or one system's failure. It was a reflection of something bigger, older, and hard to confront. The belief that certain people must still earn the right to belong. Somewhere, a little girl will watch Amara's video and recognize herself in her story. The same nervous glances, the same whispered doubts, the same ache of being underestimated. Maybe she'd feel less alone. Maybe she'd learn that resistance doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes, it looks like grace that refuses to bow. Amara never saw Richard Blackwell again. But years later, when asked what she'd say to him if she could, she paused for a long time before answering. "I'd thank him," she said quietly, "because what he meant to silence became my microphone." Her voice didn't just echo through boardrooms and news cycles. It echoed through living rooms, classrooms, and dinner tables. It forced people to ask the uncomfortable questions. Why did so many believe her seat didn't belong to her? Why is it easier to doubt a black girl's legitimacy than confront a white man's prejudice? And how many more Amaras must there be before the world finally learns the difference between equality in law and equality in life? The flight took 3 hours. The lesson will take generations. And the next time someone tells you racism is just a thing of the past, remember this: Amara Jenkins paid for her seat in full. But the world still tried to take it from her. The question is, how many more seats have to be stolen before we all stand up